this part of the session. So for now, I will invite the second speaker, Dr. Yoon. She is a research fellow and in charge of research divisions at Korea Maritime Institute. Also, today she will give a speech on North Korea's maritime and fisheries sector in the midst of sanctions and COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Yoon, podium is yours.
Okay, good afternoon. Can you see my materials on the screen, all of you? Okay, I'm going to deliver my presentation in English for Dr. Zeliger, and I can use both. Okay, so my topic is maritime and fisheries sector in the midst of sanctions and COVID-19, which could be a little bit different and new for some of you, but I wish it could be very interesting to you as well. I'm going to deliver two main things. First thing is some changing circumstances between 2017 to 2022. I think we can find some very kind of a very series of changes to North Korea. I'm going to elaborate a little bit more about that and their influences on the maritime and fisheries sector. I will just focus on fisheries and some shipping and port, which is about some kind of economic pillar of maritime things, which mentioned from Professor Wilson. I'm not deal with some military things. So introduction, why I bring this issue, because sanctions and COVID-19, I think these two made a twofold shock to North Korean economy. 2017 and 2019 and 22. And after that, this year, we are facing some kind of a momentum on North Korea's external relations, especially Russian invasion of Ukraine, and then Yoon administration, they launched this month, and also outbreak of COVID-19 in North Korea. So I will do some kind of diagnosis on North Korean maritime fisheries and some implication to South Korea. So first one, okay, the sanctions, especially UN sanctions on North Korea, is strengthened since 2017. And you can see here, United Nations Security Council Resolution 2371, 2375, 397, and these basically ban on North Korean exports of coal, iron, seafood, lead, or some textile, which was main products of North Korean export. So if you see on the graph, the blue one is coal, and green one is textile, which consists much of export structure of North Korea. So if you see the big graph, the big bar, the high bar is January, February 2016, but you see that 2019, it became just almost nothing. So most of the revenue from the foreign trade, they lost most of them, which is the main purpose and target of the sanction. So some might say that, economic sanction on North Korea has failed because North Korea is continuing their nuclear development, but at least it made North Korea to suffer from this kind of earning foreign currency. And second stage, because of this kind of sanction, 2018, North Korea tried to find a way out with South Korea and United States. They made a Singapore summit, and February 2019, they had another summit in Hanoi, but which turned out as a no deal. So North Korea set a deadline until the end of 2019 so that US can show a new way to North Korea, which didn't happen. So December 2019, North Korea proclaimed that they are going to turn their way to independence and self-reliance, which became the very clear strategy until so far. And next stage, very interestingly and sadly, we see that as soon as they proclaimed independence and self-reliance, COVID-19 just became pandemic. So they closed their doors. So these three graphs showed you the external transaction of North Korea. The top one is including import and export, everything. External transaction it goes high until the mid 2010. During this period, North Korea was eager to earn foreign currency from like selling products, especially minerals, to China, but it became just low, and especially 2017 because of sanction, and 2020 because of border closure, they lost most of them. But interestingly, if you see the import graph, even after the sanction, North Korea needs products. They cannot make everything inside their country. So you see that there is just a little loss of import. But because of COVID-19, it became almost zero. But for export part, export transaction became very low already because of sanction. So we see this kind of changes. And what happened to North Korea inside, if you see the market prices, this is quite strange. But anyway, US dollar and Chinese yuan, the exchange rate in North Korea almost very, very stable, which is very strange. So some economists says that North Korean authorities are doing something on this kind of foreign exchange. Anyway, but we see that the price of corn and especially pork, it became just soared up, and you see very fluctuated price of gas things. This is kind of the impact of sanction and COVID-19. And finally, 2022 February, invasion of Ukraine, and as all of you know, North Korea vote against calling on Russia to withdraw, and the outbreak of COVID-19, which is covered a lot by Professor Lee, so I'm not going to tell you more on that. So what kind of influences happen in maritime and fisheries sector? Fisheries sector, some of you might know that Kim Jong-un made a very strong drive on fisheries sector, which is very easy part if he make emphasis on it, because it doesn't relate it with natural, the climate things. If you push people, you can show performance. So since he became a supreme leader 2003 to 2006, you can see the production, fishery production increase. But since 2017, the sanction period, you see that the production became low. And because of COVID-19 pandemic, they were afraid of being touched from outside world. So they just doesn't want people to go fishing. Another issue is third country. Most of them are suspected as Chinese. The third country's fishing vessels observed moving into waters of North Korea. These are the fishing vessels. As I've mentioned, this 2017, the sanction also includes a transaction of fishing rights, not only seafood, but selling or transacting fishing rights. But even the sanction, despite of the sanction, you see that many vessels still entered into North Korean Sea. And maybe because of COVID-19, you can see 2021, the number of vessels became a little bit decreased, but still it happened. But these vessels, why do we call them third country, not Chinese vessel? Because most of them have no registration, no flag officially, and even no license, because it is likely violation of United sanctions. When they enter North Korean Sea, they do not show us the license. They are saying that we are just passing through. But later then when they enter into North Korea, they get license from North Korean authority on the spot. So why does it matter? Because they catch squid too much. So since 2010, their estimated capture are much higher than total production of South Korea, and even including Japan, so which became very big loss of in terms of economic things and some environmental issue. So this became very big thing. So nowadays, thanks to the technology development, Global Fishing Watch, international organization, nonprofit, they made some research from satellite and radio frequency, things like that. And they figured out that how many vessels enter into North Korea and how many vessels, North Korean vessels enter Russian Sea. And if you see year by year, the numbers, it don't decrease much, but 2021, after outbreak of COVID-19, it became very low. Now I'm going to move shipping and port sector. So as I've just mentioned that since around mid of 2010, North Korea was eager to sell product to China, so they use a lot of shipping services. So interestingly, it became higher, the kind of shipping tonnage used by North Korea. And since the sanction, despite of the sanction, their performance is just still like survive. And if you see this graph, this is the linkage analysis of maritime foreigns, which means how much the ports are related to each other. So since from 1999 to 2009, the main hub of this kind of maritime forelands was Singapore, so which means North Korean shipping services and port connection was centered of Singapore. But it changed into Thailand and Nampo. And even though South Korea and North Korea, we don't transact directly, but shipping network are still survive here and here. Even though we don't sell anything to North Korea, but the vessel is still coming and going. And inside of North Korea, if you see the share of North Korean vessels in total traffic, before there were North Korean vessels and foreign vessels as well entering North Korea, but you see here, after the sanction, most of the vessels are just North Korean vessels. Foreign vessels don't enter North Korea anymore. And the linkage, direct link and all link connected to North Korean port in other countries are just decreased and almost nothing here. So what left is just China. But even China, you can imagine that most of the exports and imports between China and North Korea can happen like on land with just a vehicle and truck. But you see here, maybe only Jilin, this orange part, this is definitely on land, like trucks. But if you see here, the dark blue one is Liaoning, and green one is Guangdong. They have to use vessels. So we see that even China's export to North Korea, we can imagine that the shipping is still used. And these are kind of types of the violation of sanctions, and how do they do this kind of shipping things? First one, they just directly deliver things like oil, core, or sand, or they make ship-to-ship transfer. They get closure and moving products, or they change their flag into not North Korean things, but foreign flagged. Sometimes they also use a self-propelled barge. These are barge. It's different from motivated motor-driven vessels. So basically, this kind of barge, they don't have the IMO number, so we cannot track that kind of barge. And also they change their voyage, their itinerary very often so that they can escape the tracking. And also they change their vessel identifiers. Basically, there is AIS, automatic identification system, but they just turn it sometimes turning on, sometimes turning off. So they make some manipulation. So this kind of example, like there is a port or oil facility, they get some oil into mothership and they just share it into small ship and also foreign flag to feeder ship. And later on, they just collect their oils into DPRK flagged ships. This kind of an example of how they violate sanctions. So this is the last one. So this was a very brief introduction to you, but I will bring some maybe 2 or 3 kind of implication to South Korea. First one is ongoing damage on South Korea from overfishing by the third country. As you have seen that despite of the sanction, the third country vessels are still coming and going into North Korean Sea, and the economic damage happened to South Korea, definitely. And we can see that the decrease in North Korean vessels, before that, you might have remembered that North Korean fishermen entered into Samcheok area, even talked to our people. But now, because of decrease in North Korean vessels activity, we see less possibility of drifted or stranded North Korean ship into South Korean water. So we can expect some less political tension and risk in terms of this kind of issue, but it will return again. This kind of things will return again and happen again after COVID-19 pandemic. So I think we need to get prepared in this kind of maritime border things. And in terms of shipping and port sector, you see it shrunk, definitely shrunk, but still working a meaningful shipping network between South and North Korea and China. And because of border closure on land, you see some new insight on Sino-North Korean trade routes and logistics in maritime sectors. And September 2020, South Korean fishery officer killed and burned on the sea. I think it is originated from North Korea's phobia on pandemic and its outbreak. If it without COVID-19, this kind of tragedy would not happen. So I think we need to prepare in this kind of issue as well. So maybe we need to cooperate in preventive measures against it's 19 against COVID-19 on the maritime border area as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yoon, and your energetic and data-based presentations. Next, we'll invite Dr. Bernhard Zelliger. He is a resident representative of Hans Korea office of Hans Jaidel Foundation, right? Okay. Thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Glad also that we wrote it in English for my benefit, but I hope you all can understand also this discussion. It was very interesting, and I liked the whole session and meeting indeed, because we have all these various aspects of security policy, security strategy, and then the maritime strategy itself, and that's what you were talking about. Let me point out a few things maybe which are interesting. First of all, on the external and internal shocks, their interaction, like drought and disasters. Another one you didn't mention, but that was the 2019 problem also on the harvest, or now COVID and the rice plantation. We have now Monegi, and it seems to be going on, but clearly there are two very different goals: to isolate people or to get the rice planting done. And we have another drought coming up there. Also, for example, if you think of the problems we get with the harvest when the corona is still on. Though I heard that miraculously in 2 weeks, 2 million people got the corona, which doesn't make so much sense in my opinion, but more than 1 million already seem to be healed by the power of kimchi. I don't know. I wonder what the story of the regime will be. I mean, we shouldn't take these figures like figures coming out of America or Europe or South Korea. Even our own figures were often more tentative. And here we shouldn't forget the political game too. there are some counterintuitive results of the sanctions I want to point out. If you look, for example, at the coal sector in 2019, due to the fact that coal was not anymore exported so much, coal prices sank and sank and sank month by month in North Korea, so that many North Koreans had the warmest winter in a long time. So that sanctions actually benefited the people. And I would ask you if you know anything about the fishing. I mean, it's really staggering. We had in 1990 basically 3 times more catch than we have now. Now it's 500,000 tons. In 1990 it was 1.5 million tons. We had in 2016 1 million tons. So it's only half. But if most of this is not sold anymore, this includes, I guess, seafood, all seafood and fisheries. I mean, not only fish, but if it's not sold anymore, do the people eat it now? So that it could even be that nevertheless, the situation on the ground, the consumption situation for the people might not be so bad. Though what I heard from but I don't know how to explain this, that's why I asked you. I heard from the World Food Program that still also in fish, they really lack, they have less than they had before. But my question is how it would fit with the fact that they don't export anymore, or that they export much less. They do some illegal exporting maybe, but much less than before. And then I would like to ask you on the short, mid and long-term effects. Some results, as you pointed out, are remarkably stable, like the renminbi rate. Some results might have been interpreted, like the rice price didn't change so much like the corn price. That's bad news, actually, because it can point to the fact that people substitute rice, which is superior good, by corn. So that could point to increased poverty rates, actually. And some are really changing a lot. So what are your expectations for the mid and long term? Will we get, you said once for a part of the situation for the fishing fleet, it will be after pandemic like before pandemic. Or might there be a new pattern or maybe even a new strategy evolving? And I would like to ask you, do you see since 1990 anything like a maritime strategy of North Korea? I would say mainly they were reactive. For example, in fisheries, when they had needs for nutrition and maybe for earnings, they pushed boats out more and more despite a staggering death rate and loss. There were hundreds of boats landing in Japan and in Russia. Even 2 or 3 years ago, there's a whole beach in Vladivostok full of stranded North Korean boats. People are probably dead, most of the fishermen. And the same is maybe if you look at the selling of licenses. When they couldn't fish anymore, they sold the licenses. When the licenses were outlawed, they sold the licenses illegally, but they let the Chinese in for some money. When the sanction came, they were ship-to-ship transfers. But that I wouldn't call a strategy. That's very reactive. So is there a new strategy in the making? If you look at the military part, for example, submarine launched ballistic missiles, there's at least a kind of idea. Chonan thinking in 2010 was also reactive, but now they seem to develop their own military strategy maybe. But do they have also a strategy what they want to do with their waters? And how can South Korea counter it? Just by military or by police, kind of policing the area? Or is there something like what South Korea hopes to achieve? There were talks of a joint fisheries zone in the West Sea. It's not so important now because, as you said, due to COVID, tensions are down, but maybe later on, something like that. Or environmentally, that's a topic I feel very close for. You might say it's not so important. We talk about really hard facts, missiles here. But if you think, today I was happy there was a Chinese presenter here. It's not very often. Mostly we talk about China. There's never a North Korean presenter. We never talk with North Koreans. Could we include them in talks of a maritime strategy, let's say for the Yellow Sea area or the East Sea area? There are environmental institutions like NAUPAP, this Northwest Pacific Action Plan or so, where we could include them maybe. And that would be actually my suggestion, to say, though we have very clear opposing military goals, we might have some place where we still can talk about certain things. There could be even something like peer pressure. If you think North Korea, recently I read an article that they started to put small fry into the sea of Myeongtae, small little Myeongtae. And as you know, in South Korea, there's no more Myeongtae. You have a Myeongtae Chukche in Kosong, but no Myeongtae. You buy it in Russia. So could there be something that you say, okay, first with Japan maybe, or maybe even later with China, we come together and we create something like a joint zone of cooperation with fishing quotas or with certain environmental measures. Let's say certain trawlers might be outlawed, certain nets might be outlawed, and this peer pressure could also lead to a cooperation with North Korea. That would be maybe interesting. And then for the last, you said COVID is a new channel potentially for cooperation, but for the time being, at least not for South Korea. Obviously, the North Koreans still do not like to talk to you about it. And they have many other options: China, WHO, the international community, and finally Korea as a last straw maybe. And how could that work out? And last remark, I found this also so interesting because, and I want to draw your attention to that, also in Europe, this region becomes much, much more the center of attention. For a long time, we really neglected the area. It seemed to be America's playground and China's in a way. And now Germany, France, the UK, the EU all suddenly have an Indo-Pacific strategy. And our own Marine, after 23 years, last year sent a boat to Busan, to port, and they now promise to come back every 2 years. And one thing they did, helping a little bit with the sanctions documentation, sanctions violation documentation. It's not even policing it because they have no rights there, but that's also interesting. So for me, but also I think also for the region, that other actors see how important it is for the world community as a whole, because if trade and shipping routes are not working here, certainly it also affects us in Europe. So thank you very much, and maybe we can discuss some of these points a little more.
Well, thank you. First, I'd like to thank that you point out that I missed something about drought and natural disaster, which is really, actually, really big kind of. Yes, I agree, and I think the natural disaster is a really like big factor, very huge and important factor. So it helps people, get warmer. So it's very good news, because I heard from people who have families in North Korea. Most of them saying that they are suffer because of sanction, because of fluctuated prices, things like that. They are saying that the target of sanction should be the regime, but actual suffering happened to North Korean people. But your news is very kind of very good things. And for fisheries, then if they fail to sell things outside, then should be inside, then it should go people. But why isn't that happen? Because first one, I think maybe despite of sanction, illegal export still they're going on. And second, they produce less than that, because for earning foreign currency, I think they push people out. As you have mentioned, North Korean vessels, they just enter into Russian Sea, but because of COVID-19, they forbid fishers to go out. They just people to just stay inside. So I think their production itself decreased. And then even they produce more because lack of a refrigerator. Even though they have fish, they cannot just distribute them. So basically, this is kind of main problem of fishery sector in North Korea. And for me, the long-term prospect, you have mentioned that whether North Korea have maritime strategy, this is kind of very reactive things. I agree with you. And they just produce the fish, they have their attention and their interest in fishery sector in terms of nutrition and foreign currency. I totally agree with that. And for any new strategy, I don't think that they are going to be very, very different after COVID-19. And Also, you mentioned now PEP, and there are some channels that we can still talk with North Korea. I know that you have a kind of channel, kind of online capacity building of North Korean people, which is very, very important in this area. And also you mentioned that Europe. I think if EU would like to provide a vaccine to North Korea, anyway, you have to deliver vaccine. But usually people will think that you are going to use China, as you've seen the Italian port, but maybe you can use South Korean port, Nampo and Incheon. I think our government, if they really want to do something with North Korea, they can use this kind of opportunity. They can be very not reactive. They can be very proactive. They can talk with America or EU if you want to help North Korea. Please use our channel. Please use your inter-Korean shipping route, things like that. And also Myeongtae and salmon as well. I think these two kind of fish, we have fishery expert here actually, but anyway, Myeongtae and salmon, this is definitely very promising product and item that inter-Korean cooperation can happen. Thank you.
Very short, because I really the rice price, corn price, and all things are very well documented. You took the fisheries data from NPQ's database, which I think is very good, but how confident are you on this data? Because as I understand,
because of mine.
Okay. Okay. So once more. So I wonder how confident are you on the fisheries data? Because North Korea doesn't really produce base data or so. Where does the data come from? Do you know that?
Oh, yeah. Actually, it's kind of very tentative data. We just started like 2 months ago because we thought that even the price of rice, we didn't trust them. Think about 10 years before. Everyone just doesn't trust the data. But the time goes by when the accumulated data became a kind of a statistical thing. So we are trying this kind of things. So I cannot say the specific details of how we get information, but anyway, we have interest people to have a contact to North Korea, and they gather information from like on the spot prices in the market. So I think, but we are not sure whether this price is real and right, but I think we need to take some more time until we have confidence on this data. So yeah, maybe later then I can speak more. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jellico and Dr. Yoon, for the good presentation and better question and comments and best discussion.